More on our top business story tonight. Brexit woes have sent the pound sterling plunging to its lowest levels in 3 years, with the prospect of a snap election making things worse. Now, for more on the pound's movement, we are joined in the studio by Philip Wee. He is Senior Forex Strategist at DBS Bank. Good evening, Philip. Good to see you. So what are investors signalling with the pound's volatility here?
I think the key thing to take note is that the pound hitting this level, this is lower than the Brexit referendum low. So we are moving into a new territory. And yes, there's a vote tonight. Let's just say that it goes against Mr. Johnson, but this does not mean that the pound is going to recover. Because I think the situation today is much more difficult. Right after the referendum, we had the global reflation trade, a nice, strong Eurozone recovery. And now Eurozone is teetering on recession risk in the three biggest countries, including UK. And I think the other thing to take note is that British pound is also quite susceptible to euro weakness. Of course, the Europeans argue that the euro is weak because of the pound. And, so you have recession risk, you have euro risk, and the next one, which is in the bond market, the bond yield curve has flattened. The yield curve is flat. So it's also warning you about recession risk, and also telling the Bank of England that they may need to do some heavy lifting soon.
All right, so there are always winners and losers when it comes to currency fluctuations, Philip. But what does all of this mean for British trade with Asia?
I think the trade with Asia is quite small. I think the customers, based on customers I'm seeing, is really on the investment side, especially property investment. So I guess compared to a few months ago, where Brexit, no-deal Brexit was a surreal, and back then people were saying, oh, if the pound drops, there's a good opportunity to pick up stuff. But I think the mood is a bit more sour right now. Now it's like you're looking at translation losses, and the possibility, increased risk of a no-deal Brexit could bring the pound to its 1985 low, and that's about 1.05. So against the Sing, you could be talking about somewhere between 158 to 160. Right. The kind of range.
So that would be the worst-case scenario. But after perhaps tonight's vote by lawmakers in the UK, where do you predict perhaps the pound will lead?
I would still not change my forecast.
Yeah.
Currently, I've been looking for it to move into a 115, 120 range. Always, mindful that the worst-case scenario could be closer towards 105. So at this juncture, as I mentioned earlier, the backdrop, is pretty weak. So, and I've also noted that when UK is one step, for example, GDP is negative quarter on quarter, we are 1 foot into recession. So, and rating agencies are definitely watching very closely. You see, the thing about the British pound is that it's also a reserve currency. It has twin deficits, so it needs to be financed. So, and you need growth, you need inflows, and you need political certainty. And that's something that we don't have right now.
Despite all of this weakness in the pound and the volatility that we've been seeing, are you still a believer in the pound's resilience here, or should investors still be holding on to their pounds?
I think generally most investors, I think for those that have spoken to some of them, I think they are still holding on to their pounds. Even the Australian dollar, the same. I think most people are quite surprised at how resilient the dollar has been. I think that is I think that's the foot, that we started that was wrong this year. And it turned out, for example, the trade war, we've been so busy arguing who's going to benefit, China or US. But in the end, what you see is US is holding up much better than the rest of the world.
So perhaps, given, the Labour Party's unfunded spending promises that it's made, if there were to be a snap election, if we were to get a Labour government in the UK, what would that mean for the pound, do you think?
Well, firstly, I don't think we're going to get a Labour government. I mean, I've been looking at the polls. What I find very interesting is that ever since Prime Minister Johnson came up with his very strong Brexit mandate, the poll shows that the votes that have gone to the Brexit party have come back to them, and they have now, and the Conservative Party is now stronger. I guess that's why he is threatening to deselect the rebels if they vote against him. So I would say at this juncture, I would trust the polls, and the polls are saying that 40% chance of him being Prime Minister versus 20% chance of Mr. Corbyn.
Philip, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your perspectives with us on what we've seen happening with the pound today. We've been speaking there to Philip Wee, Senior Forex Strategist at DBS Bank.